The Stage Door Show, celebrating the independent artist. Hosted by Dave Hondel.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to The Stage Door. This is Dave Hondel. I got a special guest with me tonight, David MacDowell Blue. David is a theater critic in Los Angeles. He's also a writer and a director of theater, and so we're going to bring him in. We talked to David a little about a year and a half ago on one of our shows, and we want to bring him back. So, David, how are you today?
Fair to partly cloudy, a bit bored with not going to the theater very much.
I know. Well, that's one of the things I want. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about is that exactly, because with everything that's going on right now, people are getting very creative on how they're going to the theater, and they're doing it on Zoom. Prior to our call today, you mentioned something exciting that's coming up, and I wanted to start with that. So let's talk about your exciting new Zoom conferencing venture out there.
Well, it began with a friend of mine named Yvette in North Carolina, who is interested in getting together to get some people together and read Shakespeare. And so she was putting feelers out and recruited me to put feelers out. And because, I'm in this gigantic theater community in Los Angeles, I put the feelers out on Facebook. And what has happened is that within the last week, we have now created a Facebook group called the Virtual Shakespeare Company. And we're going to, we have a poll up now. We have about 30 plus members. A poll up to decide as a group what is going to be our first show, which will probably be in May. And it will, right now, it looks like it will either be Macbeth or The Winter's Tale. Don't know which yet.
So now the poll that you guys created, is this something that our listeners could get involved with, or is this something amongst the 30 members of the group?
Well, you'd have to join the group.
So how many, do you have a limit? Do you have a limit to how many members can be in the group?
Not really, but we would like people, of course, who, theater folks, who are going to take part in the readings. We are still working out a bunch of things. One thing we agreed on pretty early on is that if you're going to play a lead in, like with the first show and the second show, you have to play a much smaller character.
To make it fair, right.
And then you can play a lead again. Yeah, otherwise it's going to get very boring. It's just called the Virtual Shakespeare Company Facebook group. We're there. And we have about a week more worth of poll. I said right now we're neck on neck because Yvette simply asked me about what plays would be good to start with, and I said, well, I think a relatively simple one that's not too long. And we were talking, and someone was, what about Hamlet? Well, okay, Hamlet is the longest Shakespeare play there is.
Yeah,
it's like
sure.
Uncut, it's about 4 hours.
Yeah.
So, I think, there are a lot shorter ones. So it'll be, and that's the big news. Because honestly, in the last month, I've seen several, reads, virtual reads via Zoom of some plays, including some original ones. I've had a reading of a play I wrote. Hoping to have another before the summer's out. And it's just been very, very exciting.
Yeah, it is. I mean, like I said, during this time, you got to find ways to be creative. And one of the things that, I was thinking about earlier today, my wife and I were watching the news and talking about like when things are going to go back to normal, not, it's never going to be the way it was. But, one of the thoughts that popped into my head was, going to the theater, not only are audience members sitting, shoulder to shoulder and, in these older theaters, very small theaters, but the actors on stage sometimes are in very intimate scenes. And so how is, is that going to affect the theater? Even when we get back to semi-normal, there's still going to be concerns with a possible, return of the virus potentially, and so that's going to affect the theater community for maybe up to 2 years, I would think, right?
Easily. Now, larger theaters, of course, have an advantage that they can actually put considerable space between individual audience members.
Yeah.
But smaller theater companies are in trouble that way.
Yeah.
You can do plays where people don't have to be physically very close to each other. That's not too difficult at all. That means, basically, don't do O Calcutta.
Yeah.
But and probably not Romeo and Juliet.
Right, for sure. Or Spring Awakening. How about Spring Awakening?
That'd be tricky, yeah.
Yeah.
There are other plays that will work quite well. I mean, I think probably most of, I'm going blank. Kurt Weill. I think most of his stuff doesn't really require anyone to be very close to them. You can do, Jesus Christ Superstar really doesn't require physical contact.
Yeah,
I think between any members of the cast. There's a bunch of Shakespeare's, I think, not Romeo and Juliet, but there are a bunch of others that can be done with little or no physical contact between the individual cast members. And Macbeth is one of them, interestingly enough. I've seen a production of Macbeth where it was a tremendously physical production too, but had a very small cast with everyone was playing multiple roles, and hardly anyone who was physically close enough to touch anyone. I don't think anybody touched each other in the entire performance, and it was fantastic. It was actually the best performance of Macbeth I've ever seen.
And sometimes David, if you think about too, I mean, the fact that, whether they touch or they don't touch, think about the power that could come from, a show where there is no touching, and the acting, without touching and without getting that intimate, would even be that much more, I think, that much more powerful of a scene without the actual touch, because you're really focusing on the performance rather than than the actions you're really performing. I just think it could be really something to embrace if that's the route that we have to go.
Not to mention it's tailor-made for one-person shows. I suspect that there's also going to have to be a need to find alternative venues, like just a room. Put on a show in a large room with chairs that are fairly apart. So, and things like that. I now heard there are theaters that are asking for plays that can be done virtually. They're designed to be done on on a computer screen.
Yeah, and the thing to consider too, I mean, that's a great point, because another thing that I was thinking of is not just the actors and the theater box offices and patrons that are affected, but it's also the publishing companies that are selling the rights to these plays and to these musicals. That if you think about the thousands and thousands of high schools that didn't have their spring production, or they didn't the regional theaters that didn't get to do and summer stock is going to be affected, and Shakespeare in the Park, and all kinds of things are going to be affected by this. And it's down to the publishing companies and the writers, and there's so many people that are being affected by this. And it's mind-boggling to think, first of all, not only what's been affected because of this, but what's to come. And I think the scary thing is, it's not that we all have a crystal ball and we know that when this thing is going to end, where we can all go back to the theaters. I mean, this thing is literally, it's you don't know. I mean, it could be a year, it could be 2 years. I was interviewing the guitarist from Whitesnake, Joel Hoekstra, the other day, and he's also with Cher and Trans-Siberian Orchestra, and he was telling me I mean, there's no tours of his plan for the next 18 months. I mean, think about 18. Think about it's you know it's him, the musicians, the road crew, the you know, everybody involved with the productions that are on that scale.
Every publicist, every person who is making a few bucks by being an usher. Yeah. Here's an interesting thing to consider, though. I actually think the big movie studios are going to take a bigger hit than live theater.
Yeah. Well, they sell concessions. Concessions is what they make most of their money.
Well, yeah, but the theaters themselves require concessions to stay. Second of all, the simple fact of the matter is there are no big budget motion pictures that are going to be made for a while. I mean, the insurance alone would just preclude this. So what you find is that in fact, what they've done, and I think it's generally an intelligent thing, of course, is they're delaying putting anything out. These huge blockbusters that cost millions and millions and millions of dollars to make, and they desperately need to make back millions and millions and millions and millions and millions to make a profit. How many of these are going to have to go on, direct on to video on demand?
Sure. Netflix and so forth. Yeah. Right.
But at the same time, people, want to be entertained, and with enough publicity about virtual theater, this can whet the appetite for when the theater comes back. Because theater is so much cheaper than Hollywood films. Tickets are cheaper, at least for the small theaters they are. They're much cheaper to produce, much easier to produce. And we want to be entertained. Right. But I think the movie theater chains and the major production houses are going to get kicked in the head. They were being kicked in the head anyway by streaming services and the like. Also, people are now able to do amazing special effects on their laptop. Right. So much so, I don't know if you're aware of this, but there was a huge furor in Star Trek fandom because someone started making a fan Star Trek film that looked too good. Yes, it was called Axanar. It's a battle in the history of Star Trek that's never been filmed. It's just been mentioned. And this guy who put it together, he hired professional actors. He hired people who were professional special effects artists, many of whom had worked on Star Trek because they knew what they were doing. And so there's this whole thing, and they were going to do this. And up till then, CBS and Paramount were pretty easygoing about fan films. And suddenly, then they started making a huge fuss because this looked, it became competition for the actual Star Trek film.
It probably done on a very lower budget.
So eventually, there was a lawsuit. They came to a decision out of court. But then CBS put forth a whole bunch of rules. Actually, they're not rules, they're guidelines. There's only about 3 hard, fast rules. And the first one is don't make any money off of this. You can't pay anyone. That's really different. And then the other was you can't infringe on any of our characters. And also there's a disclaimer. You have to say that none of this Star Trek material does not belong to us. It belongs to the owners of Star Trek. So, and they have a few other guidelines, which are generally said, if you follow these guidelines, we will not bother you.
Sure.
If you follow half of them, we probably won't bother you. There are a bunch of people who are breaking those rules all over the place, but they're not making anything that could possibly be considered doesn't look like it could be real. But that's the point. People can make professional looking films.
Sure.
with their own, with something you can get on GoFundMe.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're right.
I know someone who made an amazing version of Dracula. Took him 3 years around his neighborhood in Victoria, British Columbia, and he made a production that was amazing of Dracula. And it's a movie, and you can get it. It's called Dracula, Lord of the Damned.
Yeah, there's some good stuff out there. Yeah.
But I say it's the other side of it. I mean, that there's a potential that we will see a renaissance of live theater. The problem is it just has to survive until then.
One of the things, David, one of the things that I was going to mention that when we were talking about this earlier, is being in the theater. There could be, I don't know about you, but I know that they've done operas that were filmed and put in theaters. Why couldn't they film a production on a Broadway stage and then put it on like a pay-per-view or sell it? You could still go to the theater, but it's a pay-per-view production. Something that's currently on Broadway, right?
The National Theatre in England, it has now started putting up some of their productions of Shakespeare on YouTube. These are ones that were at the rebuilt, like this very interesting production of Hamlet, which interestingly enough has a woman playing Hamlet and a man playing Ophelia. So, which is cool. And Andrew Lloyd Webber has been, starting to help put together the idea of putting up his musicals, filmed versions of his musicals that had already been made. These are stage productions, and putting them up for people to see. Phantom of the Opera might still be on YouTube. There was a production, a professional production of and that's something that there's also a theater here in Los Angeles called City Garage, and they're nonprofit. And one of the things they're doing, since of course they can't put on anything right now, is they're having the individual members of their company do individual scenes, monologues, songs, and things through a brand, as it were, of the City Garage Cabaret. That is on YouTube. So the different members of the theater company are putting this up to remind everyone that this is who we are. This is, please enjoy this. We really do need your help. Can you please see your way to give it to forking over a few tax-deductible dollars?
Exactly.
So, and that's the sort of, it's tricky, but I think it can be done.
Yeah, I mean, it does take a lot of work and a lot of planning and prep, but I think, it depends on, like I said, if we know that it's not going to be for another year and a half before we can get back to the theaters. I mean, they're going to start looking at other avenues, and this is definitely one viable avenue, I think, is to start filming them and then doing pay-per-view of some kind where they can still have ticket sales, people still can watch them, and they film it one time, and so the actors are filming it one time, and then it could live the whole run of the show online and be pay-per-view, and the actors could get paid per view, however that works, and so everybody's happy, I guess, as much as you can make money. In fact, you could make even more ticket sales than you would if you did a nightly performance. If it was something that could take off, you could have multiple people. Think about the thousands and thousands of people that could watch it at the same time. And you could sell these pay-per-view tickets. I think there's actually a marketing opportunity there.
There's actually some people are doing it, but I think they're being a little bit more far-sighted. That at least there's a theater company I know that has like 100 seats. And the thing is, they saw the way it was going. So what they did was they filmed their final dress, what that would have been one of their final dress rehearsals. And it was a run-through with costumes and lights and sound, and they filmed it with multiple cameras and all this. And what they have been doing is they have been showing it pay-per-view on certain nights, but they will only sell the number of tickets that they had number of seats in the theater. So this creates, first it creates, always leave them wanting more. Yeah. Don't saturate it. Because the thing is that this maintains, they're not saturating the market. What there is, they're tailoring to a specific demand. And if the demand grows, then they can add performance.
Okay. I mean, I see that point too. But from an aspect of the last 2 months or so that Broadway's been dark or the theaters have been dark, they're losing millions of dollars really. And
that's if you're talking about the Broadway shows have to go in another direction than that. They have
like bigger commercial, yeah.
Yeah. I think we talked about this last time, that, it's a big difference between theater in New York generally is tailored for tourists and people who are perfectly willing to fork over $100 per ticket. But that's for the very reason when you look at anything, you look on Broadway, there's relatively few dramas. Most of the musicals are either based on movies or are revivals.
Very commercial.
Yeah, and that's necessary. They have to do that in order to, sell enough tickets to pay for this. And likewise, if you're going to take something on tour, now that's a huge expense. You've got to make a lot of money to pay for a tour. And so, and frankly, come here to Los Angeles, I can't remember the last time it wasn't a musical. Crowd pleaser, but it's also much more expensive. I mean, the royalties are more, the cast is larger, the sets are bigger, you have to pay for an orchestra and insurance for all this, and you have to pay royalties for the music as well as the book. It's more expensive. But, so it's a different audience than most theaters would even dream of trying to attract.
Sure.
Because we have a large theater, it's very hard to fill it in most, very often.
Even on a good day. Day.
Yeah. I mean, there's a theater in downtown LA, the Mark Taper Forum, and it's big. I mean, it's larger than most Broadway theaters. I guess I lived in New York for almost 4 years. I saw a lot of Broadway shows. It's bigger than most Broadway theaters.
Okay.
And they were doing a very, very good drama. I don't remember the title, although I remember that I did see it. I saw the original cast on Broadway, and it starred Eric Roberts. And it's a very good, intense human drama that ultimately is a love story. But at this point you're sort of going, well, this sounds like it should be a pretty good sale. But I went there, and the audience was just a little over half full. And during the intermission, at least a third of the people left.
Oh,
and I was asking people why, and because they didn't like the language.
Oh, wow.
So one of the characters runs a restaurant in New Jersey, so you can imagine he's got a tongue on him.
I live in Jersey, I know.
Plenty of F-bombs, there's plenty of four-letter words and all this, and it's just, all this, and it didn't bother me at all. But a lot of people were wearing some very expensive clothes, buying very expensive tickets. Their attitude is, I don't want to be exposed to that. So, and if you're going to make a very expensive production, then you kind of have to tailor it to a part of a broad lower common denominator. Just kind of the way things are. So.
Oh, sure.
But the thing is that what's happening right now is a big challenge because a lot of theaters basically are in a lot of trouble. I mean, there's a crowdfunding campaign right now to keep the theater district of North Hollywood open. There's 22 little theaters in North Hollywood.
Yeah, you were telling me about that last time we talked. There were several on one right next to each other, I believe, right?
Oh, there are a bunch that are very close to each other. Some of them right next to each other. Yeah,
Sure.
a bunch of nice theaters, and yeah, they're all dark. I mean, there's one I know. They're in a lot of trouble, and so they've put together a fund, and they're trying to get people to donate to help keep them.
Yeah, keep them alive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to have we usually have a fringe festival in June, and it hasn't been official, but I just cannot believe it's going on.
No, I don't think so. That's too soon from where we are right now to expect theater crowds to be by each other. And then the other thing I was going to ask you, these and I can understand. I mean, where these small theaters are coming from, because they're like a small business, and if they don't put people in the seats, they don't get paid, and they can't keep their place alive. So I get the frustration, or the desperation, I guess, is more of because I think everybody understands where we are. So it's not like people are mad or frustrated because they can't go to the theater. They understand why, but I think that there's a desperation sometimes in these small theaters, even on a regular good day, where it's a struggle to put people in the seats, and now with them being dark for a month and a half, what are they going to do? I mean, they're a small business, so it's even more so, I think, for somebody like a small theater, the black box theaters, and some of the smaller rooms that to try to get people into those seats. And I think even when this thing it gets past us and somewhat back to a normal life, I think people are always going to be a little bit hesitant to want to sit next to somebody for an hour and a half or 2 hours and watch a production, knowing that, hey, we're still not kind of out of the woods here yet. And I mean, hey, I'm doing my normal life. I'm getting my hair cut and I'm doing this and that, but I don't know that I want to be sitting next to somebody for 2.5 hours to watch a Shakespeare play. I don't know. So I think that's the challenge, and I think it's going to be a challenge in the theater community for some time to come. And like I said, we talked about before, people are going to have to think of other creative ways to run their business, and otherwise, I have a feeling, and it's a sad thing that's going to happen. I think is that unfortunately some of these smaller theaters and black boxes are going to go under, and that's very sad, very sad.
Also, when it comes to regional theaters, Actors Equity is not going to lift a finger.
Yeah.
To help them.
To help the actors or the theater.
To help the theaters, or the actors, because a lot of times these theaters are owned by actors or run by actors.
Sure.
But the thing is, Actors Equity doesn't really care if you're not Broadway.
So you got to be Broadway, huh?
Pretty much. That's their focus, is to hold a high standard to make sure the people, anybody who is in a Broadway production is being treated extremely well. But at the same time, they are, like, I've known several theater shows in LA that were shut down by Actors Equity on some tiny little thing. And that tiny little thing can be somebody without authorization from the owner brought out an extra fold-out chair so someone could sit. One more person could sit in the theater. Whoop, nope, that puts you over this number. That means you have to pay everybody this amount of money if you can't and pay a fine. Let's start with a $7,000 fine, and the fact that everybody has to now be paid at a higher rate, everybody. And now you have to pay them for their rehearsal. And you have to be fined now because you didn't pay them for rehearsal beforehand. I've seen shows like that close.
Wow, that's crazy. That's crazy. Okay, wow. I didn't know that they had that much power. I really didn't know that.
If you signed a contract, with Equity, yes. That basically, if you're using an Equity actor, and I've now known a lot of actors who just don't want their Equity card anymore.
Oh wow!
Because it's not worth it. There aren't enough. There's hardly anybody who's going to particularly in LA, where all the theaters, the vast majority of the theaters are small, less than 100 seats. Many of them 50 or less.
Wow.
And for those theaters, they can accept the idea of being that, the Actors Equity allows an equity actor to be in a play if it's a small house and not be paid if nobody is being paid. And there is a limited number of performances, because the idea is they don't want to squeeze things out of an actor for months and months and months. Yeah. And then also there must be a certain amount of insurance paid and registered with Actors Equity, which is, you should probably get the insurance anyway. But there are 1,000 little things that you have to do, and they will shut down a production instantly. I saw a very good production once this last year. I saw a very good production. I was getting ready to write my review, and the publicist said, contact me and say the show has been closed.
Because of equity? Because of Actors Equity?
Yeah, because Actors Equity, there was some little rule they broke.
That's amazing. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, because they're not working on behalf of all the actors, and they're not allowing anybody any leeway. At the same time, it's a long story. The theater community in LA has a serious problem with Actors Equity. It was, there used to be a contract that theaters could sign to pay equity actors a much reduced rate under very specific circumstances. And then Actors Equity about 4 years ago came in and said, no, we're not going to do this anymore. And then they said, we're going to take a vote of all the members of Actors Equity in Los Angeles. Should we keep the system, or should we scrap it and take up this new system? And the vote was like 80% in favor of keeping the old system, and Actors Equity went, too bad. We don't care. There's at least 20 theaters were destroyed by that decision.
Wow, crazy.
And we still had over 300 theater companies here, but damn, I wonder how much we're going to have by the end of this year. Yeah. And if they do, we do survive, it'll be by things like, the nonprofits have a bit of an advantage. Because they are used to getting grants and things. So anything like that. But the smaller theaters that are not in that way, that depends on how much they depend on what they're doing at any given time. There's I know one theater company, it's a really good one, called Theater Witch. And Theater Witch, they can go on hiatus for a while. There's not going to be a problem. Once they come back, it's just a matter will there be any spaces that they can use? And for some of their shows, their dance shows, like I know there's some bars they can do. There's an absinthe bar up in Burbank, for example. It has a room that's very nice, and people can go and get a glass of absinthe, come down, sit down, and watch Sting cabaret show they'll be putting on. It'll be great, but but they do other things. It just depends if certain theaters can hold on,
Yeah.
And I can think of some theaters I think they'll be hard pressed, but I think they can do it. And some others, I'm so afraid. Doing this virtual possibility has some possibilities at the very, very, very least of continuing to hone our skills rather than letting them go atrophy. It can still be used for networking. It can also be used possibly to generate interest in theater when people are getting tired of binging things on Netflix. because there is that possibility of to share that. That's one of the things I want to bring up with the other members of the Virtual Shakespeare Company, is to try to push this as something that can really, like, we can use this we can have the events as a fundraiser or something like that.
I think it's a great idea, David. And the other thing I want to do is I want to tell our listeners where they can find you, and you have some amazing articles, I know, on your website, and some of your reviews, and some of your works on there. So let's tell people where they can find you on your website and what they can find on there.
My website is very easy to find. It's just my name, David MacDowell Blue. That's M-A-C, not M-C. David, MacDowell, like Roddy or Malcolm, Blue, like the color, .com. That has all sorts of information about me, sort of things I've written. Also links directly to my blog, which has just hundreds of reviews by now. And I try to put up news there. I will be putting news up there within a few weeks about the Virtual Shakespeare Company and VSC. And if you will go on Facebook and just do a search for Virtual Shakespeare Company, you will find us. And we'll see what happens. Again, we're still at the stage of deciding what our first show will be, and we'll see. But in fact, when I put out there we want to do some Shakespeare via Zoom, and some people just jumped on it. Yeah. It's did I say about Zoom? There is no perfect video conferencing.
No, there is not. Well, I'll tell you one thing, David, as far as the Zoom goes, and this is just a little bit of advice from my daughter, who just had a 30-member Zoom conference the other day, and she said it was a hot mess. That was her words. And so there's got to be ground rules that says, look, if you're not talking, you put yourself on mute. Don't have the kid come into the room while you're acting and while you're talking, and it could be a complete disaster if it's not, the ground rules aren't set.
There are definitely ground rules. One, of course, is, and this has been the general rule for readings of plays, is, hi everybody, all of you who are in the audience, can you please can you mute your mics and turn your video off?
Sure, exactly.
And also use this speaker rather than gallery mode. So whoever's speaking, that's the face you'll see.
Right, exactly.
I can tell you, I said I'm working. I'm almost finished with a new draft of a play that I think is potentially a lot of fun. It is a loving parody of superheroes.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and when I say loving parody, it's like, I consider the two of the best parodies ever made, at least in terms of motion pictures, were Galaxy Quest and Young Frankenstein.
Oh, yes. I love them both.
And part of that is that they were not made in scorn, but made in love.
Right, correct. Absolutely. I know what you mean.
It's one of the things, like, I've seen several would-be vampire comedies, and they just almost never work. And part of it is that very often the people making it don't know anything about the vampire story, so they're not going to know how to mine the humor. They're just trying to make fun of a genre. Whereas I love vampire stories, and the best vampire parody, almost the only good vampire parody I've ever seen, was a wonderful New Zealand film called What We Do in the Shadows.
Oh, nice title.
Which which I strongly recommend, and now has been turned into a fantastic sitcom by Fox, made by the same people. The basic premise is it's kind of like The Office, except you're following around this group of vampires who live in a mansion in Staten Island.
So it's modern day.
Oh, yes, modern day. Oh. And they're all kind of losers in a way. Okay. They don't understand the modern world, and they don't want to. It's things like what happens if, like, they have a very important visitor who comes around from Europe, and who insists on going out, just grabs somebody, drains them dry, and the person is so damn drunk that this super ancient, powerful vampire is now high as a... And so the other vampires follow his lead. So a bunch of, like, these deadly monsters really are now drunk out of their minds, crawling back to the house as the sun comes up. Which was absolutely hilarious. But anyway, the whole thing is that this play that I'm working on, I've just about finished the first draft. Title is Capes and Consequences. I have hopes that we'll see what happens in the coming year. Hopefully might have a virtual reading of it, in the summer. Get some notes and to work on that. Yeah, that'd be fun. We did have a reading of some of the scenes in one of my playwriting groups. And when we were done, one of his actors, this great guy, just was roaring his head off, and he simply said, "David, when you get around doing this, for God's sakes, you got to let me know what kind of costumes you're talking about." What are these people dressed as?
Yeah, you need the wardrobe person.
Yeah. I told him, "Well, your character would probably be wearing a turban."
Yeah, you never know.
And a domino mask, of course.
Well, that sounds like a fun project. Definitely, I can't wait to hear about that. We'll definitely promote it on our page. When it's ready, let me know, and we'll definitely promote it and drive people to where that's going to be seen. The other thing I wanted, we're almost out of time here, David, but I wanted to also thank you for being our judge on our latest casting call at the Stage Door. That was our second one, so thank you for judging that. And the winners were ecstatic, and we're going to have them on an upcoming podcast next week. So thank you for that, and also again, thank you for being on the show for the second time, and then also your upcoming work. I can't wait to hear about it. And again, we're gonna have people go to your website, davidmcdowellblue.com, M-A-C, not M-C, it's M-A-C.com, and check out David's all of his many blogs, his stories. There's a lot to see on your website. So, again, everybody listening, please go to David's website. And, I can't wait to have you on the show again in the future. Maybe we can push your project when it comes out in the summer. And, now that everything's going to be online for the most part on, maybe it's Zoom or maybe it's not, we'll see. But either way, we'll definitely, if there's any clips we can play or anything like that, we're happy to push that for you.
Well, actually, David, I might ask you to look at the last reading we did of a play I wrote. Might want to get your feedback.
Absolutely. Yeah, anytime. I can't wait to see that, David. Always a pleasure to have you on. So, again, thank you so much. And please stay safe out there in L.A. I know that L.A. is well, I don't know if it's still one of the hot spots, but I know that it's still not out of the woods. So please be careful out there. And, and I can't wait to see what you have coming up in the future for your project. So thank you again for being on my show.
Thank you for having me.